Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Thierry. I've been an economist. I'll start with the economy, if you may. It is now widely accepted that Europe cannot retain its prosperity, its standard of living, and its influence on the world if it cannot fix its economy, right? Now, what do we do about it? Well, it seems like an almost impossible task. So maybe in order to propose concrete solutions, I will highlight just one key diagnosis of the Draghi report that has been mostly overlooked. And first, what is the main takeaway of the Draghi report? Well, it is that the European economic performance is lagging the US. And you can see on this graph, the US had an extraordinary run in the last 10 years. You have a group of countries in the middle, and you have countries like France, Italy, Canada, that have gone nowhere in the last 10 years, that have remained essentially flat. So that's a problem. The second takeaway, which I think is even more important, is that most of the gap between the US and Europe comes from actually the technology sector. I think that's something we need to be very well aware of. And that kind of becomes clearer when you look at this graph, which looks at the level of investment in research and development.
C'est pour moi, ça?
And if you look at traditional industries outside the tech sector, you see the numbers are comparable, right, on both sides. If you look at public investments, the numbers are also comparable, at least on a relative value. But the big difference is for the tech, high-tech sector, where the US dominates by a factor of 5 to 6. And that's a big takeaway, right? So what is so special about tech? Well, it's the fact that you fail all the time, right? You fail all the time in an industry that changes at a fast pace as well. So imagine yourself, you're a runner, right? You have to go very fast because you have competition, but there are so many obstacles, you fall every few meters as well. What's the solution? The only solution is to get back quickly on your feet. And unfortunately for European companies, that's not something you can do right now. Let me take a very concrete example. If you look at Meta 2 years ago, right? Meta changed their name from Facebook to Meta because of the metaverse. Well, they realized 2 years ago that the metaverse was not going anywhere. So what did they do? They fired 20,000 people, about a quarter of their staff. They rehired in a few months thousands of engineers with a more AI profile, and then invested tens of billions of dollars in physical capital, all the AI equipment that you need. So in terms of duration, it was executed in a few months, and in terms of cost, it was also a few months of the total compensation of the workers that were laid off, right? So big agility here. If you contrast that with the European situation, so take the big tech companies, SAP, Nokia, Ericsson, they announced about the same time significant restructurations, but at the same time they announced accounting provisions over several years, right? So you see a few months on one side, a few years on the other side, you have an order of magnitude difference. And then when you value a company, you're an investor and you value a company, well, obviously the same project that is profitable in the US becomes non-profitable in Europe because of these restructuring costs, right? Oops, sorry. So the conclusion at this stage that employment protection laws choke the profitability of high-risk projects that, again, fail very often. So Mario Draghi says exactly that in his report, and I quote, and you have it here. EU companies face higher restructuring costs compared to their US peers, which places them in a position of huge disadvantage in highly innovative sectors characterized by the winner takes most dynamics. So as a consequence of all that, what do European companies do? Well, they avoid disruptive innovation, right? They avoid to be near the technology frontier. And you see what you see on the screen, which is that, and it's very striking, if you compare the US and Europe, you see that in the US, companies essentially invest in high-tech R&D, when in Europe you invest mostly in old-style industries, right? And that's a very striking difference. Now, even more shocking graph is the following, and I think it puts things in perspective very well. If you look at relatively young companies, less than 50 years, with companies of a significant size, more than $10 billion of market cap, here's what you get, right? High-tech in green, so the big rounds on the US side are what we call the Magnificent Seven. And then you have Europe, which is so little, and Asia actually would be much bigger, right? So that's really striking. So what do we do about it? Well, what we discussed with Draghi, and we are proposing to national governments and the European Commission, is that let's not necessarily copy the US style of employment protection, but let's use the best practice in Europe, and that would be something like Switzerland or Denmark. So we think in particular, if you could adopt the Danish flexicurity, but maybe limit it to the top 5 or 10% of employees, the kind of area where you're going to hire your highly qualified engineers, then you're in business. And it's almost a win-win situation because the rest of the population is not going to go in the streets. In fact, they may be pleased with the idea that the privileged people are going to suffer a bit more. And at the same time, you give European companies more blood and the ability to really regain this agility I was talking about and the ability to really react in a few months and not in years, right? So that's the idea, and I'll stop here.
Yann, just to get us kind of back to where we started I'm wondering about the ideas that you just put forth there, and they are really interesting. I love that map that you showed up of blue and white with European versus US companies in terms of going from scratch to public. But I'm just wondering, getting back to our topic with Europe after the Ukraine war and Trump, how do you see Europe's competitiveness moving forward, particularly in the tech sector, being influenced by those two developments? Do you see any changes coming about, or is this going to be business as usual?
Well, it's going to make the European situation even more complex, right? Because budgets will be more restricted. So I think governments, as usual, will have to tackle several tasks at the same time, and it's very difficult. Cost of energy clearly is likely to remain high in Europe because of all these conflicts, all these tensions. And yeah, that's going to impact the business landscape big time, right? So hence the need to start structural reforms. Okay. And you can do that in any kind of context, right? War, not war.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, Europe's competitiveness will be, of course, influenced by both these developments and already has. So, okay, let's move on then.